his disciples to serve to them, and they served them to the people. They also had a few small fish, and after he had blessed them, he ordered these to be served as well. And they ate and were satisfied. And they picked up 7 large baskets full of what was left over of the broken pieces. About 4,000 were there, and he sent them away. And immediately he entered the boat with his disciples and came to the district of Dalmanutha. This is now the second time that Jesus has miraculously fed a multitude. There's some similarities. Bread, fish, large crowd. The biggest similarity in my mind is Jesus has compassion. Another similarity is probably these are not, for the most part, people who have come to hear his teaching. Why do we know this? Well, in John chapter 6, after feeding the 5,000, now John doesn't talk about feeding the 4,000. In fact, whereas feeding the 5,000, all 4 Gospels, it's the only miracle other than the resurrection that's mentioned in all 4 of the Gospels. But this is only here and in Matthew 15. And so John doesn't mention that one, but he says after the end of John 6 that the crowds went away. Why? Because Jesus was saying, you're only here for the food. And when Jesus stops giving the food, they stop following him. Plus, the message that he had was hard for them to understand and hard for them to accept. And so they stopped following. But the crowds are still here following him. So I presume that event in John 6 is probably after feeding both the 5,000 and the 4,000. So probably in both cases, this large crowd, while Jesus is taking the opportunity to teach them, and they've been there for 3 days, but they also are there for healing, for curiosity, to test out this new teacher, not really because they're convinced like Peter is that you have the words of life. So that's a similarity in my view. There are some differences. In some cases, the differences are minor. For one thing, in the 5,000, they were apparently only there 1 day. And Jesus had compassion. And in the 4,000, they've been there for 3 days. I think there's another thing that in feeding the 5,000, the disciples say, dismiss them, send them out, so that they can go into the surrounding villages and countryside and buy food. Luke tells us that happened near Bethsaida. So it's not, although our word says, particularly in the King James, a deserted area, when he fed the 5,000, it wasn't that far from civilization. There were places around that they could dismiss even a crowd that big. And it would be kind of a sudden rush on things and might suddenly be a shortage on food. But it would have been, in their view, possible. Here, they've come a long way, some of them. It seems to be a more deserted area, and nobody suggests, well, let's send them out. Even though it's maybe a smaller group, maybe not. The disciples don't say, well, send them out. Where are we going to get the bread to feed these people? because they're in a more deserted place than they were the first time. Another difference is with the 5,000, this discussion says there were about 5,000 men, and the word men there is males. It doesn't use the general male or female. Here it says 4,000 men plus women and children. So were there no women and children with the 5,000? Perhaps not. But here there were. And I can imagine the compassion of Jesus towards them. Not only are they likely to faint in the wilderness, there are women and children who may faint in the wilderness for lack of food. And one thing you see when you see Jesus throughout the four Gospels, he seems to have a special place that their society didn't particularly. Everybody loved their own kids, but somebody else's kids were just so much in the way. And Jesus seems to have a special compassion for children. Inasmuch as you've done it unto the least of these, my brethren, you've done it unto me. And so I wonder, and it's speculation, I guess, but I wonder if his compassion here wasn't in part especially aroused because there were women and children. It doesn't say that here in Mark, but it does in Matthew's account. There's also a difference in the amount of leftovers. How many baskets were picked up after the feeding of the 5,000? 12 baskets. How many here? Which one had more leftovers? We don't know, because they're not the same baskets. The 12 baskets are large, but not, they're probably bigger than peach baskets, but they're not huge. These are huge baskets. The word here is used not very often in the New Testament, but it's used in Acts of when Paul is let down over the wall at Damascus. This is the kind of basket that he's in. So this is not a little peach basket, which I don't know if you've noticed, but the peach baskets are not nearly as big as they used to be. They cost more, but, full of peaches, but the basket's shrinking down. But this was not a little peach basket. This was big enough that a man could get in it and be led over the wall. And so there's a large number of leftovers here. What's the point of the leftovers? I believe I may have mentioned that as a comment. What's the point of all these leftovers? I don't think that's the main point, that there's something to eat and they take it with them. And I've heard people say, well, Jesus is teaching that you shouldn't waste anything. They were able to be filled and filled abundantly. God is not limited in how he can fill your needs. We are limited in how we can conceive of his blessings and sometimes how we can receive those blessings. You ever wonder where the baskets came from? I mean, they're out in the middle of the wilderness. Suddenly they got these big baskets. Where'd they come from? I don't know. Baskets were used to cart a lot of stuff around, particularly food. And this may have been what they'd brought with them full of food, and now it was empty. So I don't know. The ones that feeding the 5,000, they just landed on the boat, and they may have done that here. And these baskets, and when they fed the 5,000, they may have been on the boat for hauling in fish. particularly hauling fish to market after they've been dried and salted. I don't know. But anyway, they had them. And God is able to fill our baskets. All right? We don't need to worry about that. Well, let's move on. The Pharisees came and began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him. Sighing deeply in his spirit, he said, "Why does this generation seek for a sign? Truly I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation." Leaving them, he again embarked and went away to the other side. Matthew adds, no sign except what? What sign was going to be given? If we turn over to Matthew 16, the sign of Jonah, which was? Jonah was in the belly of the sea creature. You ever hear somebody say there's a contradiction in the Bible because the Old Testament calls it fish and the New Testament calls it a whale, or is it the other way around? That's one of those things where they argue from their ignorance, because in our society, we don't just distinguish between whales and fish. We distinguish between toothed whales and non-toothed baleen whales. And we distinguish between different kinds of toothed whales. And then, some are sperm whales and some are something else, belugas or whatever. And then some are beaked whales. And we got to divide everything out. In ancient times, if it was big and if it was in the ocean, it's a whale. But it's also a fish, because the words meant the same creatures. Same reason bats are considered birds in the Old Testament when they're doing clean and unclean food. If it flies, it's a bird. That's what the word means. It's not a science lesson for 21st century civilization. It's as it appears, okay? And so these aren't contradictions. They have to do with that society. But anyway, so the sign of Jonah, he's in this creature's belly. Where is he? He's not just in this whale's belly, or creature. And I think this may have been neither one. It's God prepared something special. You try stay. Every now and then you read about somebody who got swallowed by a whale and spit out immediately. I was reading about somebody the other day that his whale had swallowed him, and he realized, I'm in a whale, and immediately the whale spit him out, because this baleen whale isn't interested in something like that. It's like trash. And so, but he's there for 3 days, 3 nights, and it's a period, it's not necessarily, midnight to midnight of 3 days, 3 nights. But it's this period, by their reckoning, 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the whale. And it's not just that he's there. He's in the depths of the sea. And if you go back and read Jonah, he says, I called out from Hades. He's, as far as the world is concerned, he's dead, because he's in the land of the dead. And when, if you were in a cave, you were considered in Hades, because you got the earth all around you, right? Even though you're not yet dead, unless the cave's in. And same thing and with water all around. So Jesus is going to be dead for 3 days and 3 nights. By the way, how many times have you heard a preacher say that when you're baptized, you are figuratively buried? It's a picture as if you were buried. No. Go back and look at Jonah. I was in where? Hades. Why? I was underwater. When you're baptized, you are, as Paul says, buried with Christ. Because you're in Hades, you're in the land, not the land, the realm of the dead, because you are cut off from the air. You're cut off from the outside world, even though momentarily. We don't do it, baptize 3 days and 3 nights. That's be a little rough. But the point is that Jesus says this is the only sign. Now, this is right after he's fed 5,000, fed 4,000, and he was doing that because all this crowd was there, because he was healing and casting out demons. So how is this the only sign that that generation was going to be given? I mean, they're asking for a sign, and he's just been miraculously feeding people. He's been miraculously healing people. He's been miraculously casting out demons. And on some occasions, he's even miraculously raised the dead, healing people born blind. So how can Jesus say this is the only sign this generation will be given? What?
Could you call it a training session?
Well, I guess. She says, could you call it a training session? I guess. These others were. I think because these other signs they had not accepted. Think of all the people, these 4,000, 5,000 who saw all these miracles and got fed, and then when the teaching gets a little difficult, they say, who can take this? Who can understand this? We're out of here. But on the day of Pentecost, when Jesus is preached as risen from the dead, and there are the signs that show that these apostles who are witnesses of this have seen him, as well as others besides the 12 who had seen him. There were thousands who believed just on that first day. And so his own resurrection was something that could not be faked, was eternal, was the greatest sign in all the Bible. All of Christianity depends on that sign. You know, there are people today who medically are declared dead, but they revive them. I was reading about some story about some lady who had fallen through thin ice and had been underwater for like 45 minutes. And her body temperature had dropped to 50 degrees. Well, that's almost like meat in the refrigerator. It's dead. But they were able to revive her. Was she really dead? I'm not going to say that. But Jesus was dead from Roman crucifixion and torture, blood loss, and dead for 3 days. And he didn't have a whole hospital of 21st century equipment to bring him back to life. He was raised by the power of God. All of Christianity depends on that. If you deny that, if you could show me that that didn't happen, I'd walk out of here right now and never come back. But you can't, because it did happen. And there's plenty of evidence that it happened. So that's the sign that Jesus gave them. That's the one that everything depends on. There are other people who claim to do, and there were people down through the years who had done some of the miracles. Some of the prophets had raised the dead. Some of the had cast out demons. His own disciples did this. A lot of people fake stuff. But nothing like his resurrection ever happened before or since. Even the resurrection of Lazarus wasn't like his resurrection. Jesus had to come and do it. Jesus says, I have power to lay down my life, and I have power to take it back from my Father, power to take it back up again. He takes it up again. Nobody does that. This is the sign. Starting verse 13, leaving them, he again embarked and went away to the other side. And they had forgotten to take bread and did not have more than one loaf in the boat with them. And he was giving orders to them, saying, watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. And they began to discuss with one another the fact that they had no bread. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, why do you discuss the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet see or understand? Do you have a hardened heart? Having eyes, do you not see? Having ears, do you not hear? Do you not remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000? How many baskets full of pieces you picked up? And they said to him, 12. When I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many large baskets full of broken pieces did you pick up? And they said to him, 7. And he was saying to them, do you not yet understand? Matthew adds that they realized he was talking about the teachings of the Pharisees. But the point that he had made with the leftovers, he's saying, God will provide. Don't worry that you forgot bread. They had 1 loaf. Don't know how big it was, but he could make it enough. I've often wondered why in both of those instances and here, why didn't Jesus just say, well, I'll create bread. Everybody sit down and there'll be bread in front of them. Poof. He could have done that. He had the power. As Satan said, there were rocks all around. He could have said, command these stones to be made bread. Could have happened. He had the power. But he wants us to rely on him. But he also wants us to do what we need to do, to use the resources that we have at hand. Starting in verse 22, and they came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to Jesus and implored him to touch him. Taking the blind man by the hand, he brought him out of the village. And after spitting on his eyes and laying his hands on him, he asked him, do you see anything? And he looked up and said, I see men, for I see them like trees walking around. Then again he laid his hands on his eyes, and he looked intently and was restored, and began to see everything clearly. And he sent him to his home, saying, do not even enter the village. This, to me, is one of the oddest miracles that Jesus performed. Why? Why do I think this one's strange? He healed blind people before and after. It seems like he didn't quite succeed. I can sort of see men walking around like trees. I presume he had once been able to see because he knew what a tree looked like. Or maybe he just felt trees. And I mean, I don't mean that as a joke. Maybe, he kind of knew blind people can see an awful lot with their hands, shapes, what a person looks like, so you can feel their face. Why did he not succeed the first time? Why did he have to do it twice? Well, I think there's a clue in Luke 10:13. He's at the village of Bethsaida. Now, Bethsaida is an important village. We don't know where it was. Archaeologists have not found for sure. They've got a couple of sites that they think maybe, but they don't know for sure where the city or village of Bethsaida was. The name means house of fish. Anytime you see the word Beth in the name, or any name in the New Testament or Old Testament, Bethel means house of God. And so the word Beth means house. And so Bethsaida means house of fish. And it was a fishing village. It's the home of Peter, Andrew, Philip, presumably James and John, and at least where they did business. And so some of his most important disciples come from there. But in Luke, Luke says, woe to Bethsaida. Why? Woe to Bethsaida. I mean, this is a condemnation of Bethsaida. And the reason, I'll turn over here and read the passage. He says, woe to you, Chorazin, woe to you, Bethsaida, for if the miracles had been performed in Tyre and Sidon, which occurred in you, they would have repented long ago, sitting in sackcloth and ashes. But it will be more tolerable for Tyre and Sidon in the judgment than for you. He had performed miracles there, and they did not believe. They had rejected him. It was such a town of rejection and lack of faith that when this man is brought to Jesus for healing, he takes him out of the town. Why does he take him out of the town? To get him away from the influence of faithlessness. To get him away from the bad influence of Bethsaida. These people don't believe. In fact, he may have even been brought by somebody kind of taunting, yeah, try this one. We don't know. And so when he does heal him, he does restore his sight, he says, don't go back into that village. I think he'd been there long enough that the man was plagued by doubt. And even when Jesus touched him, spat in his eyes, why that? I don't know. I think that's a figure for we regain our sight from the words, that which comes from the mouth of Jesus. I think that's the symbol there. And so even when he receives this, he's not sure. He's very hesitant. He doesn't really want to believe. But he does want to believe. And he's got enough faith to sort of. But I think maybe, I don't know, something in the voice of Jesus or something in the fact that he can at least see a little bit. When Jesus touches him again, It's all clear. We can't come to Jesus sort of and expect his full blessings. We can't come to Jesus kinda with an almost believing heart and expect our lives to be changed, our hearts to be cleared, and our spiritual eyes to receive vision. We just can't do that sort of. Jesus says you're either for me or against me. There are only two classes of people in all history in the world: those who are saved and those who aren't. In our society, we like everything it's kind of gray, blend. Everybody's kind of, sort of, nearly, and I'm a little bit like this and a little bit, and I got somewhere on this spectrum. And there are a lot of things in life that are that way. Not everything's black and white. Some things are. I read somewhere where there are two kinds of people in the world. No, excuse me, said that wrong. I read somewhere where there are 10 kinds of people in the world. Those who understand binary numbers and those who don't. Depending on which of those you are, you'll understand that expression. But there are only two kinds of people in the world: those who are saved and those who aren't. There are no sort of saved. And this man he's sitting there wavering in his faith. Does he have it or does he not? I love the man who came to Jesus right after the transfiguration. You get to him next week maybe. And he's brought his son who's demon-possessed, and brought him for healing. And the disciples have tried to heal him and can't. And he brings him to Jesus. And he says, if you can help him, please do. And Jesus says, if? All things are possible, those who believe, those who have faith. And he says, I believe, help my unbelief. He wasn't quite there. Now, sometimes miracles were performed on people who did not have faith. When Jesus raised the son of the widow of Nain, there's no indication that that widow had faith or that that son had faith. He may have, as a dead person, he may have had a lot more spiritual insight than most people. But there's no indication. And there were other people that seem to be saved by the faith of the one doing it. But sometimes Jesus says, be it done unto you as you have believed. And I think that's the case here. Starting verse 27, Jesus went out along with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way he questioned his disciples, saying to them, who do people say that I am? And they told him, saying, John the Baptist. And others say Elijah, but others one of the prophets. He continued by questioning them, but who do you say that I am? Peter answered and said to him, you are the Christ. Matthew 16:15 says, the Son of the living God. And he warned them to tell no one about him. Why not? Why not tell about him? I mean, there are a lot of questions. Jesus asked, not because he doesn't know what people think of him. He asked because he wants them to understand and them to realize the difference between what other people think and who Jesus really is. We have that problem today. The people in our world think all sorts of things about Jesus, that he's a myth, he never existed. that he was a good man, a philosopher, that he was a rebel in his time, all kinds of things that people believe about Jesus. And we have to come back to that point. Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, the one anointed to be king and sent by God, the Son of living God. And if you fully understand all the implications of the expression, the Son of God, please explain it to me after class, because that's really deep. But he wanted them to understand the differences. But then he turns, we continue reading, and he began to teach them that the Son of Man, that is he, must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he was stating the matter plainly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning around and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on God's interests, but man's." Peter has just said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And in Matthew, Jesus has gone on to say, on this rock, on this confession, not on Peter, but on this fact of his sonship, that he will build his church, and the gates of Hades, that is the gates of death, won't prevail against it. Crucifying Jesus won't stop it. It's coming. And Peter said, "Oh, no. You're not going to be crucified. You're the Son of God." What's the problem here, Peter? Peter is imposing a human view of who Christ ought to be. How is he different from those that they've just said? Oh, some say he's John the Baptist or one of the prophets. That was their view of who Christ was. Peter said, "You're the Christ, the Son of the living God." But now he's saying, "No, you're not going to be crucified. You're not going to die. This can't happen." He's imposing, just like they did, he's imposing his view of who Jesus is. Brethren, we need to be very careful that we don't impose our view of who Jesus is. And it's so easy to do. We find who Jesus is in the pages of the New Testament. We don't find who Jesus is in our solemn musings at night, in our reading of the philosophies of men, or even the Brotherhood Papers. We don't find who Jesus is by wishing that he would be this or that or the other. Why doesn't Jesus do this? Why doesn't Jesus? I don't know, but I can't impose on God, on Jesus, who I think they ought to be and what I think they ought to do. I need to be a servant, not a master. I need to let God's will be done in my life and let God be God and let Jesus be Jesus. And oftentimes, we don't do that. We condemn churches that take votes on what they ought to do. But, and rightly so. But if we're not careful, we'll find ourselves just like Peter, this great disciple, this man of great faith. But he's trying to make Jesus what he thinks he ought to be instead of who Jesus said he was and plainly stated who he was. He summoned the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what will a man give in exchange for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. He is coming. And there are two sides. Whose side are we going to be on? I can't answer it for you. You can't answer it for me. We each have to take up our cross, and we don't want to do that, you know. We wanted to define the terms of Christian service. And we wanted to define what that means. And we need to let God define that. We need to let Jesus. How do we do that? Again, it's not, oh, I had a vision. Beware of people who say they've had visions of what God wants in their life. Beware of people who say, oh, God's got a plan in my life and I'm going to work it out because I know what it is. He spoke to me in this still small voice. He doesn't do that. He speaks to us through his written word. And we need to spend as much time as we can learning what it is, but then putting it into practice. Not just reading about that cross, but taking it up. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and anything you think, all the knowledge, all the wealth, all the power, all the fame, all the security, even all the fresh tomatoes, if we lose our soul? And we are dismissed. Bill's going to ring.